So, you know, okay. Hold it closer. Okay. Our topic today is revisiting the Marquette and Joliet expedition of 1673, lifting up long ignored Native voices. And our speaker is Michael Douglas. And I asked him how he got interested in this topic. He told me that he lived on the banks of the Mississippi River in Prairie du Chien for 40 years. How could you not get interested in this issue? Michael went to college in Missoula, Montana, and museum school in Cooperstown, New York. And he was director of Villa Louis Historic Site for 30 years, and later worked as an interpretive park ranger in Effigy Mounds National Monument. He tells me that he has consumed the ELCA Kool-Aid. He's a member of St. Peter Lutheran Church, where he teaches confirmation, sings in the choir, and serves on the church council. He's a past board member of the Sugar Creek Bible Camp, and he tells me that he refreshes his soul in that sacred place whenever he gets a chance. And we just finished a Bible study on sacred places here at church. And surely Sugar Creek Bible Camp is one of those sacred places. So thank you very much. Let's give him a warm welcome.
It's my pleasure to be here. Sugar Creek is a sacred site, and we're going to be doing a worship hike at a sacred site in the Arboretum later this morning. I'm really looking forward to that. I'm guessing that some of you have visited my little city on the banks of the Mississippi River. And if you have, you've come into town from the east or from the north on Marquette Road, or you've crossed the Marquette and Joliet Bridge from Marquette, Iowa. And if you've done that, you've driven by our Tourist Information Center, where there's a 20-foot column with a life-size statue of Father Marquette looking at the river. Or maybe you've dropped into our city council and seen the 12-foot wide mural of Father Marquette and Louis Joliet coming down the river. They're every place in Prairie. You can't live in Prairie du Chien and not bump in, or visit and not bump into Marquette and Joliet. So no surprise, a year ago, in the fall of 2022, looking to the spring of 2023, all kinds of talk on how we're going to recognize the 350th anniversary of the arrival of these guys. These great white men in their canoes who blaze through the forest, bring civilization and the word of God to the heathen brown children of the forest. What must we do to celebrate this great thing? Well, some of us said, celebrate? Celebrate? Is that really the word we want to be using in 2023? Yes, it needs to be observed. Yes, it needs to be looked at. Yes, it needs to be recognized. Celebrate. Ooh, conquest. Change of traditional ways, the beginning of the end, the opening of the door to a challenge period for indigenous people. What can we do? Well, we can go back and we can revisit this episode. We can look at these events of 350 years ago, perhaps with a little bit of different. In 2020, in 1923, we had pageants and invited governors and really held up conquest as a great and glorious aspect of manifest justice. Not so much today. In 1973, we thought we should put white boys in canoes and bring them down from St. Ignace. Today, we were looking at some other things. So we did it, we managed it, and it lifts up the question of where does it begin? Where does the story begin? How do we begin to address Marquette and Joliet in 1673? And I think we have to really look at the beginning in the age of exploration, the age of discovery. What what happened and how it happened. We know when Columbus returned from the New World, having seen amazing things and wanting to know what kind of a formal connection could be made with Europe, so they turned to the Pope, and the Pope provided guidance. And he said, yes, indeed. Yes, yes, yes. We can go into lands that are not occupied by human beings, and we can claim them for European sovereigns. And the litmus test for defining humanity will be belief in Jesus Christ. Imagine that, the first in the obscenity of raising up Jesus Christ as a litmus test for humanity. But it happened, and that noxious weed was planted. And so the doctrine of discovery, the notion that we as white Europeans can come into lands occupied by indigenous people and claim them based on their lack of humanity, took root. And yes, it was an obscene proclamation. And yes, it was questioned within 50 years. But it took root. And indeed, the doctrine of discovery was not formally
I
repudiated.
heard it someplace, but I've never done it, but I'll try, okay?
Yep.
The doctrine of discovery was formally repudiated by the Vatican on March 30th, 2023. 500 years later, did the Pope say, we are sorry, we were wrong. An important point in healing. So the doctrine of discovery was promulgated. People from Europe were coming, and indeed they came in droves in the hundreds of ships per year. By the 1530s, Joliet and others were exploring the northeast coast, coming up the St. Lawrence River, and they were finding great resources of fisheries. And fishing was important. Fish was important. There were 153 feast days a year, fast days a year in Catholic Europe. 153 days when only meat, only cold water meat could be consumed. So there was an insatiable demand for fish. And they started with green fishing. Fishing, the Basque people, Basque people, French people, fishing for fish, gutting them, packing them in barrels of salt brine, shipping them back to Europe. Green fishing. Green fishing soon gave way to dry fishing, and that required establishing fishing camps. So in the late 1500s, fishing camps sprang up in which fishermen would spend the whole season fishing and drying fish and packing fish in crates for much more efficient shipping back to Europe. And during this period of dry fishing, indigenous people started finding their way to these fishing camps. And as, if you will, a side hustle, the fishermen started exchanging things like knives and axes and beads and textiles and kettles for native cultures, because they had discovered that in the forests of Canada were beaver. And the beaver fur was the finest fur that had ever been found in the history of the world for making felt for hats. The best hats in the world for men, for women, for military, for clergy were made from beaver fur felt. And here it appeared was an inexhaustible supply. I brought a beaver fur hat, and you can look at it, and you can wear it if you wish, and you can look at the beaver fur that it's sitting on, and you can find underneath that long brown guard hair the soft, crimpy wool of the under fur, which was the best fiber that ever been found making felt hats. Little did we know that a side hustle that began in the fishing camps of the coast would become the dominant industry of North America for almost 2 centuries. And it would bring eventually settlement to Canada. Samuel de Champlain arriving in 1603 and laying the foundations for Quebec in 1608 with this massive curiosity, but also with this dual sense of responsibility. France was a Catholic country, and they saw the Pope and the Catholic Church as the one true moral authority on earth. And they well understood the Gospel of Matthew and the Great Commission to go to all points of the world and share the good news with all the nations. And they took this to heart. And so the French believed in the importance not only of empire building for the sake of economy, but empire building for the sake of saving souls. And so they arrived, and almost at once, the French begin to develop a trade alliance with the Huron Nation. Huron Nation, a vast group of people, thousands of Native people belonged to this great alliance. They spoke an Iroquois language. They were age-old enemies of the Haudenosaunee. We know as the Iroquois. And just as the French were developing trade alliances with the Huron, the Dutch and their trade partners, the English, developing trade relations. So, and it would bring these two great indigenous nations into conflict, and would bring France, the Netherlands, and England into great conflict. And we really see the early decades of the French experience in New France as constantly being under threat by both the Haudenosaunee and the English. We'll see that a little bit more going forward. So we begin to see two real trajectories emerging: the French government building empire, and the French government bringing missionaries to teach the native people. The Franciscans, the Recollects, arrived in 1615, and in 1625, the Jesuits. The Jesuits, founded by Ignatius of Loyola, who in 1541, and he had this great vision of a counter-reformation, of how to really come to terms with that troublemaker in Germany, and really put forth the true faith. But he had a very interesting idea of a company. And he said, we must enter through their door so that they will exit through ours. We must go and teach and pray and work with Native peoples around the world. And indeed, early in the Jesuit experience, in 1549, less than a decade after the founding of their order, the Jesuits launched, I'm reading from a wonderful book called Sacred Encounters, launched one of the largest missionary undertakings in the history among the Guarani Indians of South America. And at their height, the Paraguayan reductions from reduce, the Latin verb meaning to lead back, to bring into the fold, encompassed 30 towns inhabited by more than 80,000 Indians. 80,000. And this vision of, if you could get far enough away from the corruption of Europe, if you could get to the purity of these Native people, you could have incredible success. And I think that vision of the Paraguayan reductions would fuel the Jesuits for 200 years. They wanted to get back to that incredible story. The presence of Europeans in the New World not only brought conflict among Native peoples, it brought disease to Native people. And perhaps from the Jesuits themselves, smallpox passed to the Huron, and there were devastating consequences. Their populations were reduced by more than half through smallpox. And in their reduced state, they were easy prey for the Iroquois, if you will, who received guns from the Dutch in order to expand their beaver trapping lands. And they pushed into Huronia, and they pushed those people west and west and west. And with them, we see this great westward migration of indigenous peoples from the east to the west. And the Huron crossed Lake Huron, they crossed Lake Michigan, they crossed into Lake Superior, all the way to the shores of Shawanee. And the Jesuit fathers followed. They followed them all the way out there. And by the 1660s, we see Jean-Claude Alloway actually founding a mission in the Apostle Islands. The Mission Saint-Esprit was for those renegade Huron and Ottawa with refugee. I said renegade, I meant to say refugee peoples who had fled all the way that distant to escape the Haudenosaunee. And so that founding was incredibly important. Let's see where I am here. So lots of vicissitudes in the development of New France, the movement from Quebec to Montreal as a governmental center, and in the early in the 1620s and 30s, we have our two characters being born. So I just let me turn here for a second to the Marquette and Joliet information. So Father Marquette was born in France in 1637, the son of two old families, solidly middle class. In the 1650s, he entered as a Jesuit novitiate. And by this time, the Jesuits were publishing accounts from the New World in an annual publication called the Jesuit Relations. They're fabulous. And if you want to encounter them, Wisconsin Historical Society director back in the early 1900s, Reuben Goldthwaite, edited a version of the Jesuit Relations. They're still just a great source to get the flavor of the kind of language talking about the missionary experience in the New World. And Jacques Marquette was reading these as a young novitiate and being inspired by the sacrifices that the Jesuit missionaries had made in the world. He wanted to come here, and long before he was ordained, he started pressing his people in France to be sent to the New World. He wanted to come, he wanted to serve, he wanted, if necessary, to give his life and faith. And finally, in 1666, he came. And in the same point, in the 1640s, Louis Joliet is born in New France. His father worked for as a carriage maker for one of the established, the Company of 100, which was an investment group that had been created in the early 1600s to help fund the development of New France. His father died young. He was placed in Jesuit schooling as a young lad, and he excelled. Louis Joliet would become a church musician. He was noted as a fine harpsichordist. He would be a church organist for his entire life. He took minor orders in the Jesuit order, but then decides in his late teens that he will take another track. He will, in fact, join his brother Adrian as a fur trader, and he will dedicate most of the rest of his life to fur trading. So things are moving us into the 1660s. In 1666, Marquette finally gets to come to the New World, and at once he's put into schooling in Quebec to learn language. And he has a gift for language. And he begins learning Algonquin and learning some of the sub versions of that, Ottawa, Huron, and other Iroquois languages. He's got a gift for language. In the late 1660s, several things happen. The Hudson's Bay Company forms in the north and begins a sense of pressure on the government of New France. The colonies of the New Netherlands have become English, so we've had this sort of pressure from the south. We have a new governor, Frontenac. We have a new intendant, Jean Talon. We have new direction from the king, who says it is time to open up exploration again. It is time to look as the future of New France. And so in the summer of 1671, a great gathering is held at the Straits of Mackinac. By that point, the Jesuits have founded a mission at St. Ignace. And at that mission, this great gathering of all the nations of the Great Lakes is held, and the French government is there. And they assert their claim for all of the waters touched by the Great Lakes in James Bay for the King of France, opening the door to exploration in June of 1671. In 1672, Louis Joliet actually gets a commission from the government to undertake an exploration. A word has come from that distant mission on Chequamegon Bay. Illinois people have traveled up there with word of this great river that exists in the west. They want a Jesuit to come to visit them. They have knowledge of waterways that the French have been hearing about for years. Etienne Brule had been here. Jean Nicolet had been here, but they didn't know exactly what this great river in the west was, or more importantly, where this great river flowed. So Louis Joliet was not given any government support in the way of finances, but he was given government support in the way of trade license. He would be able to begin fur trading activities, which, if proven successful, would be a huge economic benefit to him going forward. Jacques Marquette had been out at the Mission Saint-Esprit with Jean-Claude Allouet. He had mapped portions of Lake Superior with Allouet. He had met Illinois. He had been gifted an Indian boy, an Illinois boy, who had stayed with him and had taught him the fundamentals of the language. And again, he was a polyglot. He was gifted for language. He learned fundamental the elements of the Illinois language. And he was so anxious to go. And finally, let me just give you a little flavor of the journal. I can't find it here. It's really quite. News came on the day of the Feast of Immaculate Conception, December 8th, the day that Monsieur Joliet arrived in St. Ignace's orders. I found myself in the blessed necessity of exposing my life for the salvation of all these people, especially of Illinois, who very urgently entreated me when I was at the point of St. Esprit to carry the word of God into their country. We were not long in preparing all our equipment, although we were about to begin a voyage, the duration of which we cannot foresee. Indian corn with some smoked meat constituted all of our provisions. With these, we embarked, Monsieur Joliet and myself, with 5 men in 2 bark canoes, fully resolved to do and suffer everything for so glorious an undertaking. The language is rich. The language is rich, and the language is rich for a very good reason. It's not Marquette's words. Marquette, as we will learn, dies young. In his journals, which he begins with what we just heard, would fall into the hands of the editor for the Jesuit relations, the superior of the Jesuit order in New France, Claude Dablon. And Claude Dablon, I believe, will massively edit the Marquette journals. They will be published within a few years of this expedition of 1673. We will not see anything in his hand until the late 19th century. And his hand may very well be the hand of Claude Dablon, who is raising up this truly gifted young missionary as larger than life, purer than God himself. But it's beautiful language, and you've got to read these journals to really appreciate them. We are now in the winter of 1672, heading into the spring of 1673, and on May 17th, 1673, the party of 2 canoes, birch bark canoes, probably 20 to 24 feet long, not the little 16, 18-foot express canoes, not the big 36-foot long freighter canoes, but rather the canoes that we found in the rivers of Wisconsin, 20 to 22, sometimes as big as 24 feet. They contain a party of 7, so 4 in one and 3 in the other. We believe that Joliet and Marquette, they both had experience in map making. They took a compass, and they undoubtedly also took an astrolabe. An astrolabe is a device for measuring the horizon and determining latitude. Latitude could be taken from the North Star. Compasses don't work so well in the upper Midwest because there's a magnetic distraction. But you can correct your compass readings by taking an astrolabe reading at night from the North Star. The North Star is a star, and it never deviates. So astrolabe was probably the tool they had, so they could measure latitude, and the gap between the lines of latitude is 69 miles. so they could measure distance. Longitude, not so easy. The mastery of longitude would not come until the late 18th century. We had accurate chronometers, but they could figure out where they were from north to south. So they start off in May, and again we will see this date of the 17th. The 17th will arise again and again and again, and we learn that the 17th is a spiritual number. In numerology, the 17th is a number of power. Of supernatural sort of connection, and just wait, you'll hear it several more times. So on May 17th, 1673, they head out from Green Bay. They make their way from St. Ignace, toward Green Bay. There is a Jesuit mission at the pier, the mission St. Xavier. By the 1670s, Green Bay has become this sort of melting pot of all of these indigenous nations that have been forced to the west. And it's a rich population of close to 10,000 native people. And the Jesuit fathers are there in the pier. That is the destination. The journals make no mention of getting through Hell's Gate into Green Bay in May, which has always been bloody difficult to do. They arrive to St. Xavier, and they start getting information. The Jesuits have been there before. The Jesuits have gone up the Fox River, and that's the direction they will head. And they begin making their way from the pier up toward what is today Berlin, Wisconsin, arriving at a village that is Miami, Mascoutin, and Kickapoo. Again, it's a refugee village of several nations. And there they get intelligence that yes, indeed, there is a river that will lead you to your destination. Let me back up for a moment. When they first arrived in the Door County Peninsula, they ran into Menominee Indians from the word, the native word Noman, meaning wild rice. Sometimes the Menominee are referred to as full of on, or the wild oats Indians. And the Menominee said, "You don't want to go there. It's dangerous. There's monsters in that river. There are monsters that will eat your canoes. There are people who will kill you. You guys are crazy. Just forget it." They said, "Oh no. We God is on our side. We're going to be okay." So they proceed to Green Bay, and they proceed up the Fox River for the first time, encountering some difficult rapids. And there they begin, after they leave the Mascoutin village on the Fox, begin seeing things that no European had ever recorded before. And you get this tone of this freshness, seeing this magnificent Wisconsin, this magnificent river for the first time. See if I can find another great quote here. They get to the portage, and they have been gone not quite a month. And so they are given two Miami guides who will help them find their way to the portage. And they said, "We're really glad they sent these guides, because when they got there, the portage was covered in wild rice." Well, let me just see if I can show you. We knew that as 3 leagues from the Mascoutins was a river which discharges into the Mississippi. We knew also that the direction we were to follow in order to reach it was southwesterly. But the road is broken by so many swamps and small lakes that it's easy to lose one's way, especially as the river leading thither was so full of wild oats, wild rice, that it is difficult to find a channel. For this reason, we greatly needed our 2 guides, who safely conducted us to a portage of 2,700 paces and helped transport our canoes to enter that river, after which they returned home, leaving us alone in this unknown country, hands of others. Thus, we left the waters flowing to Quebec, 400 or 500 leagues from here, to float on those that thenceforth take us strange lands. then the next writing in the journal. After proceeding some 400 leagues on the same, 40 leagues on the same route, we arrived at the mouth of our river. At 42.5 degrees latitude, we safely entered Mississippi on the 17th of June. It's a joy that I cannot express. So one of the questions that we had going forward was, they had just gone through the heart of Ho-Chunk country along the Wisconsin River. They had observed all kinds of interesting wildlife, but they observed no Ho-Chunk. Where were the Ho-Chunk in June of 1673? Were they watching from the bluff side? Were they watching from the forest? Why didn't they come forward? No mention of any encounter at all. No mention of any encounter with any native people until they'd been on the Mississippi River for almost a week. And they were finally down near where the Des Moines River flows into the Mississippi. And there they saw signs of a village. And they left their canoes in the river. They walked inland, and they were greeted. They were greeted with cordiality by men from the village who were wearing European clothing. Not European clothing, they were wearing fabric. They were wearing cloth shirts. It was clear that they had had contact with the Europeans, and indeed, they were a Peoria village. They were the Illinois people, part of the same great nation that Marquette had met at the mission St. Esprit, who had said, "Come to us." And so they were led to a leader's house, who it was said came out of his lodge. A Meskwaki man gave me this when I was 14. This is my Calumet. He came out of his lodge, stark naked, holding a pipe, and he says, "How beautiful the sun is, O Frenchman, when thou comest to visit us." Wow. Well, I think that we can read between the lines that this was, in fact, a people who had contact with the French. They recognized that Marquette was, in fact, a holy man. He was wearing black robes. He said, and Marquette says, he saw my gown and knew that I was a man of faith. What they observed at this village is the centrality of the sacred pipe in traditional Illinois worship. And in fact, they will be given a calumet. They will be invited to participate in a pipe ceremony, and ultimately they will be given a pipe, and they will be encouraged to travel with this sacred pipe as they continue their journey down the river. They will encounter monsters, would have largely been interpreted as gigantic catfish, which could weigh 750 pounds and be as large as one of these canoes. They would indeed encounter eddies in the river that roared so loudly that if you did not avoid them, your canoe could be swallowed up. They would indeed see things along the riverbanks that no European had ever seen before. And they travel south, and again, every painting of Marquette and Joliet ascending the river shows Marquette standing in the canoe with a pipe or with a cross. The question is, did he ever paddle? I was at a conference last week up in Stillwater that we were addressing this, and one of our companions, oh, absolutely, he was a paddler. He was a paddler. So, okay, he paddled. So they get to they descend the river, and one of their charges was to determine in what direction the Mississippi would go. They knew starting out that the Mississippi River existed. They absolutely knew that. They didn't know if it went in a southwesterly direction, perhaps emptying into the Vermilion Sea, the Red Sea, the Bay of California, which could be the point of departure, the Orient. Or did the Mississippi River go to the southeast and empty into the Gulf of Mexico? They just weren't sure of that. They weren't sure if the Ohio River were perhaps the Mississippi River. So they begin mapping. They mapped the Ohio, they mapped the Missouri, they mapped the Des Moines, they mapped the Illinois. And finally, they made their way to the Arkansas River, where they encountered indigenous people who were not wearing European textiles, and who warned them that not that much further south, there were other Europeans. And they took that to mean Spaniards. And they took it to mean a threat. And they determined, again, on August 17th, 1673, to turn around at the mouth of the Arkansas River and to begin to make their way back north again. And they were shown that the Illinois River was, in fact, a much more expeditious route back to the Lake of Illinois, to Lake Michigan. And so they begin to make their way back north again. Again, mapping the Illinois, finding the Chicago portage, making their way to Lake Michigan, and then making their way back to the Mission St. Xavier in Green Bay. But Marquette is not well. He has developed the bloody flux, at least, serious dysentery, maybe more. And he is not able to travel any further than Green Bay. So he stays there at the Mission St. Xavier throughout the fall of 1673. Marquette, with the precious maps they have made, Joliet, with the precious maps that they have made, and the journals that he has made, makes his way back to St. Ignace at the Straits of Mackinac, where he will spend the winter at his trading post. And then in the spring of 1674, Louis Joliet will make his way back to Montreal with two companions and a boy they have been given. And they make it as far as Lachine, the rapids of Lachine, in sight of Montreal. And it's spring and the water is high and the rapids are dangerous and their canoe is capsized. And everything is lost. The maps are lost, the journals are lost, the lives of his three companions are lost. Joliet, by debt of some providence, clings to a rock for 4 hours. And fishermen who never ply that part of the bay find him clinging to the rocks and save him. But everything, all of the proof has been lost. On August 1st of 1674, he will meet with the Jesuit Claude Dablon and will make an oral report of everything that they found. A copy of journals had been sent to Sault Ste. Marie. A house fire destroyed them. Marquette remains at the Mission St. Xavier into 1674. He had promised the Kaskaskia, Illinois, that he would return to them and would bring a mission. And he was absolutely determined that he was going to do that. By the very late fall, more than a year after the voyage, 6, 7, 8 months after they had returned, he felt perhaps strong enough to begin his journey back into the mission field and went down towards what is now Chicago and spent the winter, but again was not able to get any further than that because of his health. And finally, in March of 1675, Marquette is able to return to the Kaskaskia Winter Village just in time for Holy Week. And he is there and he celebrates Mass on Thursday and Friday and Saturday and Sunday, 1,500 converts. And after Easter services, a sick boy is brought who he baptizes. He's really sick. He's really, really sick. I'm convinced that it was more than dysentery. I'm convinced that it was some sort of cancer of the gastrointestinal tract. And he begins his journey back. He begins his journey back home again with his companions. And he gets as far as Ludington, Michigan. And on the 17th of May, dies and is buried on the 18th. Later, his remains will be found. His journals make their way to Claude Dablon. And there, the journals, I think, will be massively rewritten. But let us not ignore what was accomplished. Let us not ignore the incredible achievement. And I just want to make sure that I don't miss anything of this, because I think it's really, really huge. They opened the door. They opened the door to the West. They opened the door for Jesuits to follow. And indeed, within a year of mission, the conception would be the Immaculate Conception founded among the Kaskaskia. They opened the door of the Illinois country, and government expeditions under LaSalle and Hennepin would follow. They opened the door for the French government. They opened the door for the Jesuits. They would come. It was the first time non-native people explored central portions of the Mississippi. They were the first to determine the courses of rivers that ran through the interior, the Missouri, the Ohio, the Illinois, the Des Moines, the Arkansas. They determined that the Mississippi empties into the Gulf of Mexico and that the Ohio was not the Mississippi. It was the first attempt to understand the geography of the Mississippi Valley. It served as the impetus behind the later French occupation of the Illinois country. It set a standard for peaceful diplomacy, and it really did. It advanced the prospects of both the fur trade and the evangelization of native. And it was the first to seriously use the vehicles of conquest. So we come to this story with excitement, with question, and grief over its devastation of its impact. But it is an important. It's an important event. And it's an event that we, I think, as white Americans living in the 21st century, need to reconcile and need to think about and need to listen to and need to honor the incredible generosity of the indigenous people who, again, helped and were open and helped and led the way. These men could not have survived a week without the help of indigenous people and their generosity and open hearts. And it was given to them again and again and again and again. The native voices are all over this story. They're all over these journals. We just have to pay attention. Need to do that. I've used a couple of resources, and I'm just about to shift gears into some questions here. I've used the Jesuit Relations, and I was starting to ponder this material this spring. I found out that an article that I encountered that had been published in American Heritage, written by Mark Waltinsky, was being made into a book. He finally got it out in August. He should have got it out in March. But it came out in the year of the expedition 350th. It's not bad. It's not everything I hoped for. I'm glad I got it. If you want to look at it, I'd check it out from the library before I got it. That Daniel would say praise, maybe a little. All right, what do you think? What do you think of this story? We've got a few minutes for some Q&A.
Thank you so much. One of the things that I thought of with respect earlier in your presentation is I've forgotten the name of the city in Portugal, but there's a huge globe. And it shows how the world was divided in half for the exploration by the Pope of the Portuguese and the Spaniards. And I just wonder what will happen to that globe. Will it remain as an historical kind of statement, or will it be removed? And are there other globes like that in parts of Europe? I don't know. But that was interesting to see.
Yeah, that's such a rich question. How do we remember? How should we remember? At the risk of exposing some of my own political sentiments, I guess I'm not altogether sorry when I see some of those revisionist statues coming down in the South. But I think that these visions, and I think that the Pope's repudiation of the doctrine of discovery is really important. It's really important for us to start. It's like we tell our teenagers, it's never too late to start making the right decisions. and it's never too late to apologize. It's never too late to take ownership for things that you're not so proud of.
When you're talking about the journals and the mapping, and you said at one point they knew it wasn't the Arkansas River, they knew it wasn't this, they knew it wasn't that. Who identified the Mississippi River? Who identified the Arkansas River? How long before they explored were these rivers named, and who did that?
Well, I think that we can well believe that they were discovered, that they were discovered 10,000 years ago at the end of the last ice age. As migratory hunters and gatherers began making their way into the valley, they found rivers, they followed rivers. So I think it depends on any given point in time, because there is a succession of indigenous cultures that have different languages. So I think I'm not sure if I really understand clearly the etymology of the word Mississippi. It's kind of, you find it rendered in different ways. You find the word Wisconsin, with the OU, rendered in some different ways. So if we can link it to an Algonquian origin, it's probably 16th century. If you can link it to a Siouan language, which the Ho-Chunk languages, the Iowa languages, some of these earlier languages, Ho-Chunk means people with a big voice. It's the root language, and it's very. Then it speaks to an earlier naming. But I'm not really answering your question. I mean, indigenous people and earlier. Maybe somebody else can speak to that. Yes. Yeah.
I'm curious what your town ended up doing.
Well, they had parade. They were more careful. The Prairie du Chien has for many years hosted a fur trade rendezvous. It's kind of a very loose take on history. It's a wide open, wild and woolly buckskinner rendezvous, which just has happened to be on the weekend of June 17th, June 18th for 50 years. So the city tried to build off of that. I pulled together a little encampment. I called some of my buddies that do French era fur trade, not 17th century fur trade, because those reenactors are hard to find. But I found some 18th century reenactors that sort of put together a little camp and said, this is what happened 100 years later. Because in Prairie du Chien, that's kind of the story. Prairie du Chien is settled in the 1760s, about a century later, by French-speaking Francophone fur traders who married indigenous women. I mean, that's our origin story. So we tried to really, as the European community, that's what we really tried to kind of lift up. We tried to be careful. I did have a chance to be on the Larry Mueller program, which was kind of curious because I was on the program with a nominee woman who teaches at UW Oshkosh. And she and I had two very different agendas. I loved what she had to say, but we were on two different planets, and it was really interesting. So we tried our best. We tried in all of the interviews. I did a lengthy podcast that got a little bit of airtime. We tried to hold up this notion that the least we can do is lift up the theme I introduced of native present. That it's complicated, and we have to acknowledge that this is a story of conflict. So I think that it's not much. It's really not much in the bigger scheme of things. I'm still, the first thing I did when I started wading into this territory, I went to visit one of my old colleagues at Effigy Mounds, one of my favorite people in the world, a Lakota man named Albert LeBeau. And I said, Albert, how do I handle this? How do we address this? What do we do with this? And he's just this big teddy bear at 450 pounds. I love him to pieces. And he said, well, it's going to happen, Michael. It's going to happen. They're going to celebrate this. All we can do is try to tell another story, lift up our people. So I don't know. I mean, I welcome guidance. I welcome counsel. I help them a wise direction on how to better deal with this material.
It's so important to know that there's more to the story, not to diminish or enhance any part of it, but that there's, it's like yes and, that there's more to be told.
Absolutely. It is a complicated story. And, I always, I was, a lot of my efforts working at Joliet and for the Historical Society were telling stories. I mean, that's what I did. I crafted stories. I told stories. And, there's no cliche I hate more than I love the past because things were so simple then. I always like to say, I love the past because things were so complicated then. And that's what I love about history. I love about history that it is a challenging, complicated, twisty, turny, uneven story of sometimes human beings rising above their time and acting with elegance and genius and courage, and sometimes just acting with schmucks. Yeah, absolutely. There's more to the story. Yeah.
Is there any interest on the part of the Public Instruction to craft any kind of a curriculum that would begin to look at the role of the Native Americans and all of that? I was a librarian years ago in the public schools, and I have been away from it for almost 20-some years. So I have no idea whether there's any interest or any emphasis, or is that a way to start?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. That's a good question. I think the Historical Society introduced a concept about 15 years ago. First, they introduced the theme of turning points in history. What are some of the key points? And this certainly was one of those turning points that was held up. And then they introduced a new idea of thinking like a historian, which is really to encourage students to think more critically about things like this. You can go online at the Historical Society and find lesson plans that encourage students to read the journal. But I don't know that there's been a lot to suggest they need to read through the journal and read, subtext and really look for that. I think that is a nuance that is becoming more important. I think it's still. I think we're still learning that there's more than one way to look at history than through our traditional European eyes. So I'm not sure. And I'm retired for 10 years. I'm out of the loop. I'm marginalized. I'm sitting on a shelf. Anyway, all right. That's not a very good answer.
Thank you so much. That was so interesting to give us a more nuanced look at all of this. And we did have a presentation in this very room on the document by Pastor Pino. And I was wondering, do you have a comment, Pastor? I hate to put you on the spot.
Christian national. And I traced it back to the doctrine of discovery, because I believe that really is what has been the impetus throughout history, creating what we have today, which is a Christian nationalism is trying to go back to some of that kind of thinking.
Yeah, good. It's such an important topic. I was able to participate in a Bible study earlier this year that came from the Mennonite tradition through our Lutheran Church, and it was rich and very enlightening. It's very challenging. It shows up in fundamental American documents, as I'm sure you know. It's one of my friends would say it's part of our original sin, and it may be. It's a tough one. I think it's incredibly important that we address it as Lutherans, address it as Christians and as Americans and as white Americans. And I don't think we can, I think we have to live with it and pray about it and speculate about it. It's not an easy thing to just walk away from. Thank you. Thank you.
So we have maybe 5 or 6 more minutes left. I wonder if you want to talk about the artifacts you brought.
Oh, I could do that. I was interested in bringing some stuff because I like stuff. Museum people, use material culture, they use objects to really tell stories. And so I made a selection of largely European goods because you kind of look at the balance. How did the trade happen? What was the fascination? What did those Basque fishermen have that looked really, really cool to those Algonquin people? I think this is what they had. I think they had knives. You're a fisherman and you're processing fish. This is what you're going to use. And if you've been making knives out of stones, and you see a metal knife that you can drop and it won't break and stays pretty sharp, that's a pretty cool object. So I brought the classics. I brought kettles, trade kettles, beads, axes, fire steels for starting fire, knives. I brought I was going to bring a trade musket. You guys are not real keen on having firearms in this church. Wasn't a battle I was going to fight, I'll tell you that. I said, well, I'll bring a big old encyclopedia of firearms. How's that? But firearms were important, right? They really shifted the balance of power when the Dutch gave guns to the Haudenosaunee, and they were important. So all kinds of guns in here. Here's an object. This is cool. Imagine meeting this in the hands of a Haudenosaunee warrior coming at your face. It's not a real heavy club, but my gosh, it would leave a mark. Yeah, it's got a really ugly face, really scary face. See, that's gonna be great. So these are largely reproductions. On the native site here, I brought an unlaced snowshoe. I brought some brain tan deer skins. I brought some. I always love to have fall of on, have wild rice, and this is largely unprocessed wild rice. So you can really see it does look like oats. Looks like wild oats. And then let's see what else. Oh yeah, and this is a little. This is what started it all. This is a new beaver fur felt top hat. But it had to have one of these. They were really expensive, but you had to have one if you were had any sense of status at all. And they show up in all the illustrations of the wealthy. So yeah, you're welcome to look at this stuff. It's really the cool thing about bringing reproductions is that you can touch them. So help yourself. Good. Well, thank you.
Well, do you want to say anything about the hike you're doing afterwards?
Oh, I don't know a whole lot about it. I just am fascinated by the fact that you have this worship tradition of going on a hike. And we're actually going to be at the Arboretum. And when we first started talking about the hike today, it was going to be a picnic point. And I thought, oh, that's cool. But then it got changed because the marathon is at picnic point today. So we're going to be over at the Arboretum, and we're going to be near effigy mounds. And effigy mounds stretch across the southern half of Wisconsin, an evolution of the mound building tradition. But they're only found in southern Wisconsin, from Lake Michigan to the Mississippi, just spilling over a little bit into Iowa, and Illinois, and a little bit into Minnesota. The epicenter for effigy mound building was here, the Four Lakes. I mean, this is the heart of it. And Lake Wingra, which is still in the springs, it's a source of life. So we are really going to a cool place. We have to be, I think, mindful, and I'm just going to share a few words when we get there. But we have to be mindful that this is Ho-Chunk tradition. We are in Ho-Chunk walking in a place, a sacred Ho-Chunk site. And we can respect that, and we can enjoy that, and we can draw our own spiritual fulfillment from being outdoors. We also have to recognize that we come to it as Europeans. And be mindful that the Ho-Chunk, maybe some of us are Ho-Chunk, but most of us aren't. And we have to remember that too. I guess, I think that's important. It's gonna be fun. Can't wait. Hiking in church. Two of my favorite things. Together. It's in fact, what's wrong with that?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.